Stuart, thanks for joining us on Coping with Corona. First of all, is everyone okay in your family, everyone in your sort of circle all right?
Yeah, my family are all fine. As a company, we've only had a couple of people who have been unavailable for work through Corona, so I think we've done quite well on that regard. We'll talk about how we went into the pandemic later.
Have they recovered? Are they all right? Or?
Yeah, they're all recovered. Neither of them had to go into hospital. We did go in quite early. We did go into lockdown quite early. We locked our offices. We closed our offices, about 2 weeks before the official lockdown. So I think that's probably helped us in that regard.
Just for the audience, what does ElectraLink do?
So ElectraLink is the data hub that sits at the centre of the UK energy market. We transfer data between different market participants. We also analyse that data and make that analysis available to the marketplace so that people can see what's going on across a number of different areas, including change of supply and also what's happening with distributed generation. So we do that, and we also have a governance services business, a very successful governance services business, which looks after the codes, actually quite interlinked with the data landscape of the industry to actually allow the markets to operate.
Let's be honest, I don't know, I can't say we all, I certainly underestimated COVID when it first broke in China. And I remember in the early part of the year thinking, well, it's a bit just like flu. I couldn't have imagined the decimation, A, in terms of, people's lives, but B, also in terms of how it's affected businesses. What was your initial reaction when you started to figure out this is going to be a bit more serious than we probably all thought?
That's a really good question. Actually, I'll be honest, it was more my team that was plugged in than myself. I, a bit like you, viewed it as it's another serious, communicable disease that we should be worried about, but it's not going to have a huge impact economically in the UK. I mean, if you cast your mind back to the previous, not pandemics, but previous outbreaks, they were in Africa, they were in Asia, they were in Middle East, they were in South America, they weren't in the UK. So I think it was my team. In fact, I know it was my team who raised the alarm. And as a senior management team, we took the decision, as I said, to lock down quite early. It was a decision which I thought was maybe a little bit preemptive, but as it turned out, was absolutely the right thing to do.
And that's an interesting one, isn't it? When, as a boss, your gut feeling is it's not as bad, but your team are telling you that. Did you need a bit of convincing?
Yeah, a little bit, but I mean, the management style, my management style, and the management culture that we have in ElectraLink is quite collaborative, and it's quite consultative. And this isn't an organisation. We're a central body that sits at the centre of the energy market. This isn't about having strong bosses who will wag their finger and tell people what to do. This is about trying to understand what the whole market requires from us as a service provider, and for us to provide that service. So I guess by nature or nurture, we've become this kind of organisation where we do listen to a wide range of opinions before making a decision.
With your data being so valuable, used by so many people, obviously you needed to transfer into resilience mode very quickly. Can you briefly outline what you did, how quick it was, and how you managed, I assume, to get everyone home working? I assume, is that what you've done?
Yeah, we have already, a few years ago, we moved to a completely cloud-based infrastructure. So all of our enterprise systems, all of our data is in the cloud, in a cloud that's maintained by a variety of different providers. It was quite interesting actually, as we had board meetings after the lockdown, and our directors were concerned about servers that were locked in the office and filing cabinets locked in the office, and we just had to sort of explain to them that there was nothing there apart from desks and an internet connection. So we were lucky in that regard. I think we obviously were quite technologically savvy as a business, and so we moved into that world. I think the other thing that was actually more important than the technology was the fact that as a business, roughly 50% of our staff already work from home.
Oh.
And so we had a working from home culture. We had our management systems, some of the softer things had been set up in advance. We had set clear objectives, we had clear line management responsibilities, so we were comfortable to allow people to work flexibly, either in the office or from home. So those cultural pieces, I think, are important. You can always go out and buy, a bunch of laptops and sign into Microsoft Azure. How do you actually work as a business? I think is more of a challenge, and we'd already addressed many of those issues prior to going into lockdown.
One of the things I suppose that matters is if you're that vital to where people are looking for data, having the ability to have that resilience cloud-based, which is great. What have you done? What's changed? If the business, half of it was working from home anyway, has it been quite easy to do it? Have you been able to manage all your systems? Are your customers still able to reach you? How's that all been working?
Technically, I mean, our business fits into two. We provide technical services. So those services are delivered in many cases across the internet. So that hasn't changed. And as I said earlier, we outsource most of the actual production of those services into cloud-based solutions. So that doesn't move. The people-based side of our business, the governance services side of our business, we already conducted a lot of our meetings virtually. It's been a bit of a, for the energy industry, they're not particularly receptive to new technology, but we've done the hard miles with our customers, persuading them to first move on to Skype and then migrate onto Teams, which is what we currently use. And we've made quite a seamless, we've made a very seamless transition. And what's quite interesting is that some of the laggards have been forced to move into these new ways of working. There's no choice. I mean, obviously, in a lockdown, in a pandemic, you can't have the luxury of being able to travel into central London and enjoy some FaceTime with your industry colleagues. And interestingly, we are seeing people realizing that actually it is a much better way of working. I don't think it's a complete substitute for face-to-face meetings, but the endless meetings, which sort of characterize a lot of change management in the energy industry, I think are probably going to be a thing of the past. The face-to-face meetings will be much more focused on the more important decisions, and a lot of the work that goes on, the necessary work that goes on in the background, crunching through the detail, I think can be done virtually. You sort of and is being done virtually.
Yeah. So let's talk about where we'll be. Okay, so we hope that the lockdown will end soon at the time of this recording. We hope that we'll start to get a phased return. And we know that there's been huge economic shock, which will last for a while. But let's just talk about the energy industry specifically. You touched on something there. Do you think post-COVID, energy will, dare I say, get the kick up the backside it needs to be much more digital? Is that what you think is going to happen?
It's a good question. I mean, I think there are, it's a conservative industry and there are entrenched ways of working. And as are in many other markets and many other industries. And in the same way that other markets and other industries are going to be impacted by COVID, I'm sure the energy market will be impacted too. What we've touched on so far is just change management. I think what we'll also see is a much greater reliance, going forward, a much greater reliance on digital innovation in order to differentiate yourself. I think the financial consequences of COVID, particularly in terms of rising debt or potentially rising bad debt from customers, are going to be, and we were talking about this earlier, are going to be the proverbial tide moving out and seeing who's actually wearing their swimming costumes. I think in the supplier world, we're going to see some fairly significant changes in terms of the way that market operates. And there's going to be a greater focus on efficiency and the use of data to operate more efficiently, more use of web-based infrastructure, less use of call centers, certainly less face-to-face interaction with customers in the business market. So yes, I think there are going to be a lot of changes. I'm not going to be able to predict them all, but I think the general direction of travel is now quite clear.
Like 2008-9, after this, there'll be a lot of changes. Some businesses will be here and a lot will have gone. Do you think the energy markets will be entering a period of high instability? Because on the counter side, oil and gas is at the lowest price it's been for since pretty much records began. It's an interesting time, isn't it, where you can look at one of the traditional markers of instability in the market is the commodity price, which is way low. And yet we've got an incredibly insecure world, both for us as people, but businesses themselves. So do you think the energy markets will enter a really unstable time, or do you think it's just fresh territory?
Well, I think it's an interesting question. I would sort of phrase it in a slightly different way. Is how do you define instability? I mean, commodity pricing, yes, of course, it's very volatile at the moment, and very volatile, I think, in the consumer's benefit. And long term, it might trigger the fundamental change required in the fossil fuel industry in order to meet net zero. Maybe, but I think it might be better to look at stability in terms of the actual delivery of electricity to people's homes and businesses. I mean, what we're seeing is an acceleration of the point at which we have to better manage supply and demand in order to allow the system to balance at a local and a regional level instead of at a national level, which is what National Grid currently performs effectively through the ESO. So what we're seeing is obviously an increase in the amount of renewable generation, which by definition is unpredictable. And at the same time, we're seeing a reduction in the overall levels of demand. So that point at which the interaction between variable supply and increasingly unpredictable demand intersect, and you do get instability, is now upon us. So the need for the ESO to be more innovative in the way that it manages demand. We've already seen an emergency change, or we're seeing an emergency change go through at the moment, where they're looking to disconnect distribution connected generation in order to maintain stability in the network. We're also going to see the distribution companies have to be, or to continue to be, more innovative in their use of flexibility services. So I think there's going to be a real focus on that area. Obviously, the data that we collect and analyse and make available will help in that regard, particularly in relation to where distributed energy energy generation actually takes place. But I think the only way you can manage that complexity with that level of granularity is through automated machine-to-machine interfaces using a whole variety of data sources, not just ElectraLinks but others, in order to automatically manage what's going to become a much more complex marketplace.
And finally, do you think that energy and it's difficult to predict, but there seems to be these trends where we're facing a point of pivoting, where we now go post-COVID to much more distributed energy, as you say, the balancing becomes more local. Maybe more of us are working from home. Demands will be different. Offices may shut down, and there's much more use of data in the cloud. And then suddenly you've got server farms that need loads of power. Do you think, whatever happens, that we may be moving towards a much more distributed future?
Well, I think at the end of the day, and again, I don't mean to sound too philosophical, these changes are driven by public demand. I mean, yes, policy helps, but they are driven by public demand. And if public want distributed generation, or if public want the benefits which derive from distributed generation, for example, lower carbon emissions, then it will happen. So I think you've got to look at the impact of COVID through the lens of how does it change public perception and public opinion. And I think, and again, I'm not an expert, but what I see is that public opinion is that the lack of pollution, or the fact that pollution levels are falling, and the actual tangible changes in the natural environment that we see around us as a result of that, I think people are picking up, and people actually like and would like to perpetuate. And so when faced with choices going forward, I think the politicians, if they're doing their job, will reflect that shift in opinion, or that acceleration in the shifting of opinion, and reflect that in the way that they drive the market forward. So I think there is a change in the public, and that will be reflected in the direction of travel of the energy market going forward.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time today.
Not at all. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks for having me.